There were several elections in Europe. There were elections in Poland, elections in Romania, elections in Portugal. We're going to talk about them, but for this segment, we're going to talk about the presidential elections in Romania. Right, so before we talk about them, we are doing courses. We have the Trivium that you may be interested in. It's about classical education, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, things that the current educational system doesn't educate students with sufficiently. So definitely check out, we have the individual courses, Foundations of Writing, Foundations of Logic, and Foundations of Rhetoric, but also we have the bundle in a great offer. Definitely check it out. And we have also the webinar. If you want to find out more information about it, you can sign up for this meeting and see if it is for you. This is 7 p.m. UK time for Thursday, the 22nd of May. So by all means, this is free. Check it out, sign up for it, and see if the courses are for you. I think you're going to like them. Right, so we are talking about now presidential elections in Romania. And I think this is the first segment we are doing about Romania and its presidential elections. But we have been following what happens there pretty closely. And we are definitely going to talk about the wider context and especially the presidential candidacy of Călin Georgescu was annulled back in December. And after his performance at the first presidential elections at the end of November 2024. But the main contestants of this presidential elections of the second round were Nicusor Dan and George Simeon. So we're going to talk a bit about them, what they represent, and what happened in those elections. And then we're going to talk to you about the wider context and whether the EU went out of its way to be very authoritarian in ways that arguably it didn't have to. Definitely, we are going to talk about what happened there. So this is Nicusor Dan. He is the mayor of Bucharest, elected twice as a mayor of the capital of Romania, who yesterday won the elections. That was the second round. What happens is that for a person to be elected president in Romania, they need more than 50% of the vote. In the first round, he secured around 21%, whereas George Simeon, who lost yesterday, got 41%. But there were three other candidates who had a large share that disproportionately went for Nicusor Dan on the second round. So let's see what's going on. So are they saying with 100% of the votes counted, the centrist candidate won nearly 54% of the ballots cast, a clear win over hard-right candidate George Simeon, who is a fan of Donald Trump. Simeon opposes providing military aid to Ukraine and is critical of the EU, looked on track to win the election after he swept the first round on May 4. As I said, he got around 41%. However, Dan gained ground after trouncing Simeon in a televised debate. So they engaged in a debate that seemed to be going in favor of Nicusor Dan. Let me say some things about it. So yesterday, Nicusor Dan got around 54% and George Simeon got around 46%. So who is Nicusor Dan? So he's a maths prodigy. In 2015, he founded the Save Bucharest Union. Next year, it turned into the USR, which is called the Save Romania Union. And about a year afterwards, in 2017, he left, and he has been independent ever since. He left allegedly due to the internal factions of conservatives and progressives within the USR. Now, let's note that within the EU Parliament, the USR is adjacent to we'd call the liberal center, to the Macron, to the Macron side of things.
Absolutely. There's nothing independent about him.
So in 2020, he won the mayorship of Bucharest. He was re-elected in 2024, and he basically stands for, I'd say, a pro-EU agenda, a liberal centrist agenda, if you would like. He is in favor of the EU. He's against Eurosceptic narratives. He is pro-NATO. He says that there has to be a partnership with the US and NATO within the context of an EU membership. And he's also in favor of boosting the military spending of Romania and arguably capitalizing upon its domestic defense industry. Right. So
all in all, so far, he's a perfect Davos man.
Perfect Davos man, yes.
Yeah, super.
Good summary.
Yeah, perfect Davos man, looking for a good career in a retirement somewhere after he's done what he's told.
So I will reserve judgment for this, but it looks like he's definitely advancing the narrative of the EU at the moment, especially when it comes to Ukraine. Now, I will say, and the reason why I am a bit reluctant to say either way is because I don't know that much about Romanian politics. Mm-hmm. I'd like to know much more to give you an informed opinion, so I have to be honest on this. But also, I think there's a tendency of Americanizing non-American politics, mm-hmm. and I think that at the moment there is, especially on X, the reign and the domination of the MAGA infospace, and there is a tendency of trying to apply MAGA categories on the non-US area of things, which should be taken with a pinch of salt.
True.
So,
if you look at both the previous tweets, this one and the previous tweet, so George Simeon is not only pro-Trump, he's pro-Putin, but anti-von der Leyen.
yes.
So, at the end of the day, this is all about just painting them in the pictures of what the elites are now doing across the whole of the global, in particular Western politics. It's that you're either pro-EU, pro-dying in Ukraine and not supporting Trump. And if you do support Trump, then you're bound to be supporting Putin as well. There's no non sequitur on that. You're either one or the other. I'd say no nuances.
I'd say that this is the more, you'd say, U.S. perspective. And these elections definitely represented a clash of perspectives. One is the pro-U.S. that tries to talk about the EU as being a uniquely globalist organization, which unfortunately it very large is. But on the other hand, I think that there are definitely globalist elements within the U.S. and they still remain. So,
including within the MAGA movement itself, including within the sort of Trump camp.
Yes.
Yeah.
I haven't got rid of everyone, unfortunately.
So let's talk about George Simeon. George Simeon was the pro-sovereignty of Romania candidate, the pro-MAGA candidate, and he did have a large support by the MAGA camp. Here we have Mike Benz saying, George Simeon, the pro-Trump candidate in Romania, won the first round election 41-21 against the NATO EU blob candidate 2 weeks ago and somehow lost the runoff today.
It's the same thing that happened with Marine Le Pen, basically, where she would do extremely well in the first round, and in the second round, the entire political spectrum would unite to try to defeat her. In Hungary, to try to defeat Viktor Orban, they managed to get literal Nazis and literal communists into the same, I think it was a 9-party bloc trying to oppose Orban. So you see the same story being repeated, but yes.
And the same strategy. If you look what happens in Turkey, the capital is more left-wing, more EU supportive, and there are more students, and all of them vote for this kind of weakling of a man who doesn't like, is the opposite to the president. You've got the same in Hungary, where they try and get the capital. Yes. Here you've got the same in Paris, the same in London. That's their first strategy. Let's get somebody in there that's one of us, and then we can utilize him to promote their name, their face, their character, and the funding to take on anyone that might come from the sticks, the suburbs, where the proles live.
Yes.
And then we can control the proles from our own elitist centres.
Right. So here we also have people linking Simeon to the pro-Trump camp. Here we hear Romania is at a crossroads, and so is the US influence in Eastern Europe. George Simeon stands for sovereignty, for a strategic alliance with Trump's America, not Biden, Macron, and Brussels. A vote for Nicusor Dan is a vote for the globalist elite. Romania first, America first. Now, I don't know to what extent it's particularly good for non-US campaigns to attach their name to Trump, not necessarily because Trump is mistaken or about lots of things. lots of things he gets right, but I think that to a very large extent it works to a segment of the population, but to the greater segment of the population, the general public, I think it definitely seems a bit servile to US interests at the expense of other. It's
alienating.
Yeah.
It is.
And you could arguably say that in Canada this didn't work, and it hurt Pierre Poilievre, who was seen as, in a way, the closer to Trump candidate.
And Australia.
And Australia.
Same,
yeah. So Marine Le Pen here also endorsed George Simeon. She definitely feels, I'd say, targeted by the EU establishment, and
she is.
She has
every right to, every justification.
Yes. Here George Simeon appeared on Stephen Bannon. Here with Jack Posobiec. So definitely he seemed to be the pro-MAGA favorite.
Yeah.
And from an EU perspective, because we hear the MAGA perspective, from an EU perspective, there is definitely lots of worry about candidates who make their pro-MAGA, let's say, nature as their flagship.
Yes.
Is because they are saying, well, what if suddenly the MAGA establishment thinks that it has to make concessions to Russia and give lots of European, let's say, and give lots of parts of Europe to Russia in order to secure a sort of aid of Russia against China. This is one of the things that the European establishment is thinking when it comes to
think about it this way.
Pro-MAGA candidates.
For the Europeans, the worst possible outcome is a Russian-American agreement, because given the extent of European military weakness and economic weakness, between them they can dominate the continent with no challengers. And so the EU establishment needs to rally and ensure that these challengers fail in order to keep up their own space of autonomy.
And the other argument that builds on that is that if you're going to allow these two big powers either side of you to actually have influence, the worst thing you do then is allow your nation states within your group to also have patriotic, conservative-based, nationalist parties who believe in their country over a set of individuals that are running it from the centre in the European Commission.
Yes.
And so that EU elite, which has been built up over 40, 50 years, which includes the large corporations that are benefiting from the commissions, from the NGOs and charities that are benefiting from their largesse, all of them will see weakness because they too might say, okay, we're not actually going to get our funding anymore, and our lives and our luxuries will go.
Here we have George Simeon talking about mass migration and Trump.
We will oppose illegal migration. We will stop the anti-American change in Europe.
Będziemy opierać się nielegalnej imigracji i będziemy opierać się antyamerykańskiej polityce w Europie.
Donald Trump! 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 Donald Trump is not just a person, he's a symbol of freedom that will cover all the free world.
I don't know, how does this sound from the perspective of someone from, let's say, in Romania? How does this look?
Well, it's interesting. I was in a small coffee shop just outside of Winchester by chance with my daughter yesterday, and we were having an ice cream, and we ended up with a conversation with a chap who was from Romania. Bogdan, if you're listening, now that I've told you to watch, very interesting man, all about freedom. He felt that his nation, after Ceausescu, had become more dominated by a new form of communism. And that new form of communism, in his view, was the European Union. So there are those who see alternatives to the European Union, whether it's coming from Trump, whether it's coming from Simeon, to actually say that we want a different way of thinking in our country, not the way of the elites. Because, of course, straight after Ceausescu, in we came with the European Union, in we came with the MI6 and the US, and we started to decide who were our people. We positioned the politicians, and we positioned the business people to be in charge of the influential areas before stripping out the parts that they wanted. So you've kept an elite, you've built on an elite. And some of those that decided to get rid of Ceausescu, ardent communists, realized where the wind was blowing, and they kept their jobs, they kept their influence, they were suddenly promoted into big companies, NGOs, and moved to the EU. So they kept their good lives. That's what we're up against, the same people, and their families and friends who continued after that.
Right. Let me say something. I think that this rhetoric was designed to address the Romanian diaspora, but I don't think it worked well within Romania.
No.
Because if you see the issue with immigration to Romania, they have a very small migration population. It's 3.6, and most of it is of European origin. And this rhetoric targeted Romanians from the diaspora, but it worked only to Romanians that were outside of Romania who were in more Western nations, and not to the extent that they particularly expected. Whereas in other cases, the Roman diaspora chose to help Nicusor Dan. So there's another issue. So let me just give you a really fun thing, which was, I think, very unfair to George Simeon. I want to say at some point he announced, I'm the new president of Romania, and he used the flag of Chad, which I thought that it was a bit weird, but I checked out and I saw that the flags are really close, and it's just the shade of blue that is a bit different. So he just made a mistake. But then people made fun of him, and they said, no, make Chad great again. That was a fun moment, but I think it was a bit unfair to him. Right, so he made this, initially he said that he won the election, then he said that that the votes have been counted and that Nicusor Dan won, and that he isn't going to challenge the results. And let us go to Georgescu now, because what happened was that there were presidential elections in Romania at the end of November 2024, and Călin Georgescu won the first round. He didn't become president, he won the first round with around 23%. And then what happened was that the EU annulled the results, and they basically said that there is a campaign of misinformation surrounded by Georgescu. There have been more than 800 TikTok accounts that are boosting his image and his message, cultivating support for Georgescu.
800 accounts, that massive number. Wow. And
also they accused him of being pro-fascist, being essentially someone who is supporting anti-constitutional and anti-democratic forces within Romania and forces that are pro-corruption as opposed to anti-corruption, which is the big flagship of Nicusor Dan.
Didn't it turn out that the campaign was actually organized by the opposition to him, and that they themselves had sponsored some kind of campaign? Then the Romanian courts annulled the election on that basis, and it turned out that the Russians were not involved in any way. So they sort of manufactured a story themselves, very similar to the Russia collusion story in the United States, and then used that to annul the elections with full EU endorsement and support. And so you had also the founder of Telegram saying that
I saw that.
the French intelligence had told him to make sure that right-wing voices in Romania were suppressed.
Yes.
Except that he only spoke about it after the election. Now, I'm not in his position, and I don't understand the pressures he's under, and he's been arrested for, owning Telegram, essentially, in the past. But there is a concerted effort to play around with elections and to make sure that the right person wins.
I think that I take everything with a pinch of salt. We're in the digital age, and I think that basically we cannot have election campaigns without digital foreign interference. There will be propaganda campaigns in every election.
The flip side of it is that you then end up in the position where for any electoral result you can allege some foreign intervention online. It will be partially true, and it can be used as an excuse to annul any election.
These are the dangers, and that's what points to the potentially to the unnecessary exercise of authoritarian might by the EU, because I think that the way they acted on Georgescu's case essentially was completely unnecessary.
Yes.
Because Georgescu fought a campaign that was based upon a very specific agenda that on the second round was almost bound to lose. The way that they reacted, that the EU reacted, and especially here we have Thierry Breton, I'm definitely certain, Stephen, that this isn't your favorite person from the EU. He's not mine either.
He'd have us all arrested and put behind some sort of fencing walls and only allowed out when we've been re-educated to accept the European Union, as many like Thierry is, unfortunately.
And the point is that he is the smug face of the EU. He was out on a panel and he was so happy that they did this, and they were saying, well, we can cancel elections. We did it in Romania. We can do it in Germany if necessary.
Of course, and they're also using their own state agents to manipulate the social media framework. If it was Russia or China, the Americans are doing it. We're doing it. The European Union countries are doing it.
Yes.
And then they turn around and say, oh, it's misinformation. Well, we're doing misinformation too. So everybody is now smart enough to understand. The lines are being drawn because people are understanding the misinformation that's coming from both sides. They just are making sides. They don't like people like Thierry Breton. And that's what's happening. People like Thierry Breton, who are making money, living nice lives, want to keep it that way and keep the poor out in their own walls. The rest, which is a bigger number of people, are saying we're fed up. It's just the middle ground who have yet to understand that they're the people who are going to be wiped out as well. They're beginning to understand it slowly in different countries. Are going, oh, well, we better stick with what we know first, the safety hands, and as it gets closer and closer, then they're going to move over to the other parties. And they're aware of it and they know it.
Right, and I think basically that this face of the EU is what is boosting the anti-EU sentiment, and justifiably so. Right, so I think ultimately speaking that this has been a very telling case study, and it represents
an election near you.
It represents clash of perspectives that we're going to see more of in the near future.
Absolutely.
Yep.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.